Hello, Mooncrafters. Welcome. This is Craft of Moon. So the other day, I woke up, it was on the full moon. I woke up and actually hadn't even gone to sleep. I couldn't sleep. I got out of bed. I looked at my phone and I happened to see that the live stream of the capture of Maduro was being played. So I came on and I put on a live stream because I looked up the astrology and I was pretty fascinated by the astrology of it. And I don't really do a lot of mundane astrology, and I'm not going to be going in that direction on this channel, at least not right now. But there's something about the way that was portrayed on the news that, I don't know if triggered is the right word, but it connected with the experience of my youth when I was a teenager, a late teenager, and the Iraq War, the Operation Desert Storm, was taking place. And the news played it like this. I mean, you could turn on the news and you would watch the recordings of the bombs dropping and the oil rigs on fire. And, I was like, it traumatized me in the, I guess, the small t sense of trauma. I mean, it wasn't like it was a physical trauma, but it was deep. Had a really deep impression by this Operation Desert Storm. And I have, every time we've gone into a conflict since, it's just something about it really, it really takes over my experience, and it's really hard for me to focus on other things. And so, while I don't want to turn this into a mundane astrology channel, I think I do want to just take another video and look at the astrology of this as a way to kind of process through the experience and step back a little bit from it, and not be able to look at it archetypally rather than being engrossed in the details of the moral right or moral wrongness, or whether this is legal or not legal, all that kind of stuff. I really don't want to, that stuff can really consume and take a person, take over your consciousness in a way. So yeah, I wanted to just put this second video up. You can take a look at my first one. I'm blurry-eyed. I may take it down at some point, but I'm blurry-eyed. I'm stumbling through the delineation, and the news is loud, and I'm kind of like talking over the news at a couple points. But it's interesting because that was when I first originally started seeing the astrological symbols. And so I wanted to just bring the that kind of screen up again with the chart and just take a look at some of the chart dynamics again, because I've had a little bit more time to reflect on them, especially with all the continuing news. So let's flip over to that. All right. I'm not going to be playing the news this time. We don't have a live stream going. That's just the PBS NewsHour Venezuela aftermath there in the corner. But let's just come over here to the chart and take a look at this. Now, as I mentioned before, and you've probably seen from other astrologers are already starting to connect with some of the symbols that have happened. We see the moon is right on top of the sun, the natal sun of the U.S. chart. So this is the biwheel, and the inner ring represents the planets for the United States. The outer ring represents the planets at the time that the order was given. So at the time the order was given, the moon was not quite over the top of the sun. You can see they were separated by still about 4 degrees. But as the operation started and then proceeded, and the capture of Maduro was almost at the moment when the moon was right over the sun, or it was just moments before when the transiting moon was over the natal sun of the U.S. chart. And well, I might pull the Venezuela chart up again here too, because what's interesting is the Venezuelan sun is a few degrees, like a degree and a half, or it's not 2 degrees. It's a little bit more than 1 degree. So it's like 12 degrees of Cancer. This 12 or 13 degrees, where this is the 14th degree of Cancer. So it's a little bit closer to where the moon is, the Venezuelan sun. And so it's interesting that the Venezuelan sun and the U.S. sun form nearly a conjunction, even though they were their birth dates are on different years. The Venezuelan sun and the U.S. sun form nearly conjunctions in their natal charts, or their inceptional charts. So the moon was actually almost right on top of Venezuela's sun when Maduro was captured, and then moved then into the U.S. sun. But what I wanted to kind of focus on was just kind of pick apart a few more of these symbols. The looking at Mars, where the sun is moving into the Cazimi with Mars. Mars is extremely debilitated at this point. It's considered to be combust. It doesn't yet have the renewal force of the Cazimi that's taken place, but it is under a highly activated state. And we can see Venus is moving very quickly into the Cazimi. And I think by the end of the operation, she may have reached her Cazimi. So Cazimi meaning at the heart of the sun. So the sun is about to take over Mars, and they're going to be joined, and Venus is taking over the sun and is going to be joined. So Venus is the ruler of the 6th house and the 11th house. So the 11th house in the U.S. chart would signify like the allies, and then the sixth house would represent, it's the house of bad fortune, labor, slavery, servitude, service, different things like that. So Venus in this placement, when we're looking at it from the frame of reference of the house significations that the rulers are representing, Venus is representing this kind of dichotomy between the allies of the United States, which are being stressed by this experience, and the house of bad fortune. The things are not quite going right. And so Venus is coming into the Cazimi with the sun, and is actually forming she is closer to a place of power in this experience than Mars is. Mars is ruling the 12th house of hidden enemies and the 5th house of children, creativity, and offspring. When we think about a country, I think of that as like if we were to think of this is the chart of the U.S., maybe the 5th house represents the individual states. It's kind of hard to think about, but something like that. So we have this stellium, because Mercury's here in Capricorn as well. So we have this 4-planet stellium opposite the 4-planet stellium of the natal U.S. chart, which includes Mercury, Sun, Jupiter, and Venus. So in the natal chart, Jupiter is in the 4th place instead of Mars. So we have a kind of a mirror experience of the 8th house, which is a hidden place. It's a house that signifies things that are more difficult for us to deal with and for us to manage. Death is the common signification for the 8th house. There's other people's property, other people's resources. So this could be like, the resources of, well, if I was thinking the 11th house is allies, but the 7th house could also signify the allies. And so this could be the resources of allies, or just the resources of any. This is even open enemies, this 7th house. So this is even the resources of your enemies. So if the 8th house is the resources of your open enemies, and if Venezuela is filling that role, then what we're seeing is the activation of those resources coming under control of the resources of the U.S. The second house would represent the resources of the U.S. Then the other thing that I was thinking about here is the placement of Pluto and what Pluto is signifying. So Pluto entered Aquarius, and we've got Pluto there till about 2043, 2044. And so now Pluto is being in Aquarius is in the third house of the U.S. chart, which represents the neighborhood, the surrounding area. This is a very lunar house. And if we think about the neighborhood of the U.S. and we think about this re-emergence of the Monroe Doctrine that the current administration of the U.S. is trying to resurrect and bring back, this Monroe Doctrine represents the, it represents, the assertion of dominance of the U.S. over the Western Hemisphere, of the, North America and South America. And I think that's interesting with Pluto in the third house of neighbors for the U.S. chart. It's really pulling in the themes of power. Pluto is the planet the most strikingly aligns with the archetype of power itself, just direct power. When we say a plutocracy, we're talking about the ruling of those that are powerful. So if you have power, then you get to rule in a plutocracy. So Pluto is power. It's the transformation and disruption of things. And in the third house of the U.S., it could be seen to signify this assertion of control over the North and South American hemisphere. And that is an interesting position and an interesting placement to think about starting out this Aquarian period, because the kinds of policies that any particular president makes, to an extent, they can be changed and crafted by the following administrations. But more often than not, when they cause a directional shift, that directional shift doesn't often come back. It doesn't often just revert back to something that was. It's it then takes a new direction. So if a new administration comes in, if Trump really asserts this Monroe Doctrine back as part of the policy for the next 2 or 3 years, then by the time a new administration comes in and can start making changes, that policy will have set in and will have sort of solidified. And so we can see that with Pluto being in the third house, that this act of pulling in the power of the U.S. back into its own neighborhood and, being more focused on its own neighborhood, so to speak, may end up lining up with the entire transit of Pluto in Aquarius before it becomes reoriented somewhere else, before the power, then Pluto will move on to the fourth house, the U.S. fourth house. And so it'll be interesting to see what direction that goes. But this whole shift in, foreign policy may, in the U.S. chart falling in the third house, may be aligned with and signify what's taking place here with this Monroe Doctrine resurrection. And I don't know a lot about that. I haven't studied the history of the Monroe Doctrine. I just know that it's in the news right now, so I can't really speak a lot more than that, just thinking that it's kind of aligned with the neighborhood. But you can see that Pluto's right here. It's the very beginning. And soon Pluto will be lining up with the south node. So in the next couple years, let's see if we can figure out when that's going to be. Just fast forward the chart here. There we are. We're both in the 7th degree now. Pluto just moving in there. So we're looking in 2028 is when Pluto will align with the south node right as this north node experiences. So we'll have this kind of a Pluto on the south node with the south node of the birth chart, or the inceptional chart of the U.S., along with the transiting north node. So that's an interesting shift that's going to take place there. So 2028 is going to be a year to really think about how the shifts in foreign policy relative to our own bordering countries and the countries that are in the same hemisphere as us are lining up with the significations of Pluto in that third house. So that was an interesting way of something interesting I was seeing about Pluto there. And I already mentioned before in that last video, but I'll mention again the square between Saturn and Mars at the time the operation took place. So this whole year, and I've got this course coming up, the 5 cosmic catalysts for your best year yet, in which I focus on the catalysts, the planetary archetypes as catalysts: Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, and Uranus, and how we can use those planetary archetypes to look ahead and be prepared for the year to come, and to use them as a way to really bring us into what we can bring the best for ourselves for this coming year, right? So this is how we get those 5 catalysts to work for us and with us. And so I'll be, tapping into these archetypes in a much more positively, personally aligned way. How do we use them as individuals, and how do we reference them and address ourselves to those planets individually, as opposed to what the mundane significations are, and looking at the stark reality of why some of these planetary activations are so synchronistic with the planets of the natal chart, of the inceptional chart of the US for this particular experience. So yeah, I think, this mundane stuff is interesting, and I might end up putting up another video or 2, or maybe I'll take them down. It's kind of more of like a personal processing of the experience, just because it's difficult to kind of watch the news and be pulled into the narratives that the newscasters are creating for us. And I think just keeping our eye on the archetypes and noticing that they're actually being activated. The archetypes that we're seeing unfold in the world around us are being activated in the sky. And it doesn't really, it's not like it makes us feel better about it, but it does help us to kind of gain some perspective and some distance from being totally engrossed and enmeshed. At least it does me. So hopefully, maybe if it helps you, great. But one thing I was just thinking of here is that I didn't notice before, or I saw just a few minutes ago and I didn't point out, was that Mercury, transiting Mercury, is applying into an almost a perfect opposition with the exceptional Venus of the US chart, which I think is also because of the way that the air, I think of this as really signifying the air, the airplanes and the helicopters. I was about to say the Air Force, but I think there was a lot of planes and helicopters from the Marines and the Navy too. So not just the Air Force, but just the air capacity, the military air capacity, I think is indicative of this. And, Mercury signifying flight and the communication that had to take place, the opposition between Mercury and Venus could activate this component of the communication being more fluid, more accessible and able to work out. Maybe that was, there's a lot of stuff here that's, signaling benefic intervention of these planets that are in the chart. Jupiter and Venus are there, and then Venus in the transiting planets. So I think it's going to be a wild year. And, we've got an administration which is totally doing things that are but I'm trying to parse my words carefully here. It seems like every president that fills that office has worked harder to strengthen the power of the executive branch relative to the judiciary or the legislative branches. And this president, even more than any of the others in the past, is taking steps to improve or increase the power of the executive branch, and to the irrelevancy of some of the other branches as being almost adjuncts of the executive branch itself. And so it seems like the way that this was taking place was kind of along those lines, kind of like taking power to see if power can be kept, or if, the other branches are going to, rise to counteract. So we'll see what happens. This almost feels like it's not quite a civil war, but there is a direct conflict in the U.S. between the branches of government that is becoming more and more exacerbated as time goes by because of the actions of the executive branch that's in place right now. And it'll be interesting to see over this next year and over the next several years how that plays out. But for sure, we have Mars, which is just about to go through its rebirth. And in the US chart, Mars is in the 7th house of open enemies. And so it'll be interesting to see how the evolution of Mars over this next year, as it goes through a number of its phases, connects back to the inceptional Mars of the US chart and its placement within the house of open enemies. Something I just kind of like for kicks, I just thought maybe we could do a secondary progressed chart of the US to see what that looks like really quick before signing off. Progressed Sun in Pisces. Let's see where the transit comes in on that. Well, the first thing I noticed was the Saturn Neptune has just passed over the progressed Sun. not pulling a lot. I'm not pulling a lot out of the progressed chart. I'm not seeing it right now. I might look more at that later and come back and do another video. We'll see. But anyways, just, yeah, that's the kind of the astrology of the event of the U.S. Capturing the president of Venezuela. We'll see if I do another one of these videos. Until next time, keep your eye on the sky and make a wish upon a star.